They laughed at her, called her weak, dismissed her because of her old GI. But 14 seconds later, the black belt coach was on the mat tapping out. And the nobody they'd mocked? She stood tall, not just beating a man, she challenged an entire system. This is the true story of a woman who changed everything without raising her voice. Don't forget to subscribe because sometimes the strongest people are the quietest ones. Elena Wagner took one last look at herself in the car's mirror. The gray, simple GI she wore, with a brown belt carefully tied around her waist, didn't represent years of exhaustion, but rather the start of a plan. She took a deep breath as she gathered her hair at the back of her head. Today was the day she would turn the fire inside her, which had been quietly waiting for years, into a controlled blaze. She grabbed her bag from the seat next to her and got out of the car. The sound of bodies hitting the ground, screams, and the faint rubbery smell of the mat behind the glass doors opened a window to a world she knew well. But this wasn't where she belonged. Not yet. 3 months ago, while saying goodbye to her grandfather at his quiet funeral, she had made him a promise. The dojo he built was founded not only on technical knowledge, but also on honor and character. But the world outside? It had become a sport culture poisoned by competition, showmanship, and disrespect. Her grandfather had seen this, and, looking into her eyes for the last time, had said, "Real Jiu-Jitsu doesn't just determine the winner. It reveals who fights with heart." That's why Elena was here today, to protect the spirit of true martial arts. And the first step in doing that was to expose the rotten arrogance within this academy. The academy called Elite Combat House had earned its reputation not through champions, but through fear. The head coach, Eric Roth, defined the road to success through humiliation, eliminating training methods and aggressive drills. Elena had watched this man's videos countless times. His dismissive looks towards women, his preference for male students, and his refusal to let women on the mat because they were too emotional, were even whispered about on social media. Today, Elena would walk in like an ordinary woman with a brown belt and begin documenting the truth. The first thing that caught her attention when she walked in was the silence. But this silence wasn't born of respect. It was a quiet born from pressure. The young man at the reception barely looked up from his phone. "Are you new?" he asked. Elena nodded and said, "I'm here for the advanced class." Brown belt, 16 years of experience. The young man eyed her suspiciously from head to toe. Her thin frame, simple posture, and plain GI set her apart from the muscular figures in the room. But Elena was used to such looks. She simply signed in, and when asked her name, she said, Elena Braun. She didn't give her real last name, because the identity she wore today was that of a different story. As she entered the locker room, a message came through on her phone. "Camera's ready. I'm in the back corner." The message was from Nina, Elena's closest friend, who had secretly enrolled in the academy 3 weeks ago and was observing from the inside. Today, she would be there to capture footage. A few women were in the locker room, but the competitive scent in the air left no need for words. As Elena silently tied her belt, a muscular woman approached her and said, "Are you new? I didn't like the look of you." Elena smiled. Sometimes the eyes deceive. The woman sneered and walked out of the room. This moment was a sign of what was to come. When Elena stepped onto the mat, all eyes were on her. Even her posture was defiant. She bowed, but no one returned the gesture. Especially the man in the middle, the one with the black belt, tightly gripping it and glaring with furrowed brows. Eric Roth stared at her and spoke loudly. "So this is our new brown belt? Should we put up signs to make sure the ladies don't mix up our yoga studio with this place?" Laughter spread across the mat. Elena's eyes absorbed every insult, but her body showed no sign of anger. Only she knew the storm inside her. "Today, we'll practice escape from fixed positions," Roth said. "Let's use Elena as our model. After all, she claims to be an advanced student." Elena moved to the center of the mat and bowed. Roth didn't bow. This man, trying to assert dominance even in his posture, lacked even a fraction of the grace of a true master. The moment they made contact, Elena noticed Roth's attempt to show off his physical strength. His pressures were forceful, lacking technique. But this was part of the game. Elena pretended to give up a few positions, making escapes at the right moment, leaving the impression of being adequate but unimpressive. She was still hiding her true strength. But Roth loved games, and within the first 20 minutes, He began pushing Elena's limits. Is this what 16 years of experience looks like? He mocked. Who was your trainer? YouTube. This time, the spark in Elena's eyes faded. A focused silence replaced it. That was a line crossed. But not yet, she told herself. It wasn't time yet. And when the time came, just 14 seconds would be enough. Eric Roth was speaking as he pressed his full body weight onto Elena. But his words weren't meant to teach. They were meant to humiliate. A brown belt who knows how to escape this position would just turn their shoulder like this, he said, forcefully moving her arm. It didn't take long for Elena to feel a slight pain in her shoulder, but there was nothing on her face. This was the patience she had nurtured for years, now manifesting in her body. Roth trusted his physical strength and reputation. Elena, however, relied on a much older and much stronger legacy buried deep inside her. Most of the students in the class now looked at Elena not as the newcomer, but as a target, because Roth's attention had shifted to her, and that was drawing the attention of the other students. As Elena spun on the mat, she glanced at Nina. In the back, sitting in a corner and pretending to tie her shoes, she was positioning her camera. The lens was quietly recording everything. Every verbal humiliation, every physical boundary violation was being captured. This wasn't just a personal test, it was the forced reflection of a system. The moment arrived when Roth reorganized the class for free sparring. Let's have some fun now, he said, his voice trembling with false enthusiasm. The winner stays. Everyone will fight in turn. Elena, you start. His eyes locked on Elena's, and the familiar arrogance inside him was almost tangible. Then he called out to the others, I'll be the first opponent. A murmur spread across the room. It wasn't traditional for a coach to face a new student in a fight, especially in such a flashy manner. But Roth saw it as an opportunity to teach a lesson. Elena, however, knew the game had already started. Elena stepped to the center of the mat and bowed silently. Roth didn't bow. He stood, not on his knees, but firmly on his feet. Show me your 16 years of experience, brown belt, he said. Elena didn't say a word, just assumed her position. She regulated her breathing. The wooden bracelet on her wrist, a piece passed down from her grandfather, lightly touched her skin. She closed her eyes for a moment. Her grandfather's voice echoed in her mind. Don't struggle to show your strength. Patience is waiting for the right moment. It began. In her first move, Elena slightly advanced, attempting a classic single-leg entry. Roth reflexively brought her to the ground, but it happened easier than he expected. Once on the ground, he mounted her and shouted, This is why women shouldn't get the same belts as men. Elena's back was pressed into the mat, but her eyes were shining. Because this was exactly how the plan was meant to begin. Roth needed to cross a line, to play his arrogance in front of the crowd. And every second, every word was part of that plan. As Roth applied pressure to her shoulder, he was about to transition into an arm lock. A few students were leaning in eagerly. Elena was now at the decision point. Continuing the act would increase the risk of injury. But her grandfather's teaching echoed once again. True mastery is knowing when to use your strength. Every fight is worth teaching, not winning. And at that moment, Elena made her decision. It was time for action, not patience. With a slight hip turn, her first move disrupted Roth's balance. A small angle shift, the space created at the elbow. Roth's face momentarily twisted in confusion. What are you doing? He asked. But Elena didn't answer. She just kept moving. Her technique was flawless. The transition from defense to attack was so smooth that everyone around her had wide eyes. Elena locked Roth's arm between her body, placed her leg at shoulder height, raised her hips. In an instant, Roth's right arm was fully extended, completely trapped between Elena's legs. 1, 2, 3. Roth struggled to escape, but every thrash only tightened Elena's hold. Panic started to show in his eyes. He tried to free his shoulder, but the pressure was increasing. Elena's face was still calm. This wasn't an angry moment. This was a teaching moment. 4, 5, 6. The students in the room were holding their breath. Something had changed in their eyes. The mockery had faded, replaced by curiosity and respect. Roth's arm was fully extended. Elena was applying pressure, but with determination and without harm. 7, 8, 9, 10. And finally, a loud slap echoed. Roth had slapped the mat twice. The silence in the room was as heavy as a funeral. Elena released him and pulled back, kneeling and bowing. Thank you, she said calmly. Roth stood without even making eye contact, straightened his clothes. For him, this wasn't just a physical defeat, it was the collapse of his authority, his arrogant pose, the image he had built over the years. But the real battle was just beginning. After the loud slap on the mat, the brief silence that followed felt as heavy as smoke on a battlefield. Elena didn't get up. She bowed her head, giving Roth a chance to rise. There was neither arrogance nor victory in her eyes. Only respect, as her master had taught her. Roth rubbed his arm as he walked away, angrily smoothing the wrinkles in his GI while trying to adjust his shoulder. But his knees seemed to have given way. Nina, sitting in a corner of the mat, silently continued recording while murmurs began to spread among the students in the class. Was that really a brown belt? That move? That level? She was definitely a black belt. Elena got up and stepped aside, picking up her water bottle. But now, the glances weren't avoiding her. They were direct, filled with intense attention. A large student named Keith approached her, initially with a mocking expression, saying, "I was going to pair up with you, but I think I'll pass for now," this time without a laugh. Elena simply nodded in response. Just then, another woman walked over from the back corner of the class, Daria, the muscular figure who had told Elena, "I didn't like the look of you," on the first day in the locker room. But this time, her eyes spoke something different. "Who are you really?" she asked, not with harshness but with disbelief. Elena didn't look away. "I trained with my grandfather for many years. I've never been registered anywhere else. I haven't participated in any tournaments. But I've been practicing this art for years." Daria's eyes narrowed. But that transition, the arm lock, these can't be so smooth just with theoretical work. Who was that grandfather? The voice that broke the silence in the room wasn't Roth's this time. Instead, an elderly coach, quiet, perhaps an assistant instructor who had been watching from the corner, stepped forward. "Wagner," he said, almost in a whisper. "Are you Carl Wagner's granddaughter?" Elena's eyes briefly flashed. The old man continued, "I watched him in 1989, at a seminar in Sao Paulo, Brazil. His techniques were extraordinary. Even then, he stayed away from tournaments. He lived with discipline and loyalty. He taught very few people. But those people, you never forget." A new whisper spread across the room. Elena's true identity was slowly starting to be understood. She was no longer just a brown belt. She was the heir to a master who had come here, hiding her real last name. It wasn't hard to see the color drain from Roth's face. His eyes avoided the competition photos of himself hanging on the wall, focusing instead on the mats beneath him. His true enemy wasn't Elena anymore. It was his own students, his own system, and even his own past that was being questioned. Why was this secret? Roth finally asked, his voice still cracked, but softer now. Elena took a step forward. "Because I didn't want you to show me respect right away. Respect shouldn't be given based on title or name. It should be earned. What I tested today wasn't just you. It was the system. It was how newcomers are treated in this environment. Women, the nameless, the silent ones." At that moment, Nina stood up and showed her phone. "It's all been recorded," she said. "But not for exposure. For change." Elena nodded. "My grandfather taught me that Jiu-Jitsu isn't just about fighting. It's about character development. If something is going to change in this academy, the minds need to change first. It's not who wears the belt, but what that person serves." Daria slowly approached and bowed her head. I'm sorry for what I said on the first day." Elena smiled. "We're all judgmental before we see something. But the real question is, what do we do afterward?" At that moment, Roth silently got up, looked at his own belt, and adjusted his jacket. "I guess," he said, his voice now calm and deep, "I'll need a private lesson from you tomorrow morning." The room fell into silence again. But this time, it wasn't from tension, it was the kind of silence born from acceptance. The change had begun, but it wasn't over yet. And Elena hadn't come here for just a day. The next morning, Elite Combat House was buried in an unexpected silence. The lights in the gym were still off, and students whispered quietly to each other before they spread out on the mats. The events from the previous day had already shattered the usual atmosphere of a typical training day. Eric Roth was no longer the early coach who stormed in with commanding orders. His office door was closed, and behind that door, he was facing a reality he had long ignored. In the area he once thought was unbeatable, someone had come and quite literally brought him down. But the more painful truth was that this person was an outsider, someone he had never seen coming. Elena was one of the first to arrive at the academy that morning. She wore her usual plain GI and had her grandfather's bracelet on her wrist. As she entered the door, no one greeted her as a stranger. A few students nodded to her, and some came directly to ask her technical questions. Daria had already come over with a notebook. "What was the angle in that transition yesterday?" she asked directly. Elena knelt, moved onto the mat, and gently began explaining. She was no longer the invisible woman. She had become a symbol whose name was whispered, whose eyes opened others. But deep down, she knew this was just the beginning. When Roth left his office, all eyes immediately turned to him. But this time, there wasn't the familiar power in his steps. There was a hesitance. His GI was neat, but his eyes were distracted. He walked up to Elena, his voice low and even. "I kept my word. We can start the lesson." Elena nodded. "But this won't be a flashy technical training session." Roth didn't understand. "What do you mean?" Elena moved to the center of the mat and knelt, beginning. "Today we'll talk. We'll learn posture, balance, silence, not numbness, but depth." The students watched in astonishment. Their instructor, the one they had followed, was now kneeling and participating in a character training lesson from a woman. This was a bigger change than the fight the day before. Roth also knelt. His face was expressionless, but in his eyes, there was an undeniable questioning. Elena began to speak slowly. "My grandfather used to give belts, not just with technique, but with vision. It's not what your eyes can see. Patience, ethics, the desire to learn. These were more important. Maybe that's why many people don't know his black belts. But those belts were stronger than many of the champions you see here." Roth lowered his gaze. "I spent years fighting. I earned respect by winning. But there was always a void. Maybe that's why I was so harsh. To suppress my own shortcomings." Elena looked into his eyes. Championship isn't a bad thing. But when it becomes part of a system and starts crushing other paths, its essence is lost. "The technique you used on me yesterday, Kimura, was correct. But if your intention is wrong, even the cleanest technique becomes poison." In that moment, every student in the room was silent. Even the medals on the wall seemed to listen quietly. Roth took a deep breath. "You're right," he said. "I started this because of someone like your grandfather. I was 16 years old. I watched a video of him. It wasn't a technique that brought everyone to the ground. He just held the position with his breath. But I wanted that calmness, that control." Tears welled up in his eyes. "Over the years, I forgot, because the system taught me to win quickly, to get attention." Elena moved her hand to the bracelet on her wrist. "I sometimes forget," his voice too. "But every morning, I remember. And now, we can remember together." Roth nodded. "I want to start again. I want to teach real jiu-jitsu. I can't quit the tournaments, but I can change the way I teach." Elena stood up. "Then this won't just be an academy. It can be a place of transformation. But first, we need to change that sign." All the eyes in the room turned to the bright sign at the entrance, "Elite Combat House." "It shouldn't just be the elite who come here anymore," Elena said. "Everyone who wants to heal should be able to come." And at that moment, Roth smiled for the first time that morning, genuinely. The removal of the sign in the gym wasn't just a physical change. It was the beginning of a mental revolution. As the words "Elite Combat House" were taken down, a handmade cardboard sign was placed in its place. "A new path begins." Some greeted this new path with curiosity, while others sank into an uncomfortable silence. Every change meant loss for someone. Some of Roth's old students interpreted his lack of shouting as weakness and began whispering among themselves. A few didn't even show up to training. But Elena had expected this. Resistance is the earliest sign of acceptance. The first day of the new regime was marked by a silent training session suggested by Elena. Training without speaking, where techniques were conveyed through eye contact and the sensation of touch. At first, the idea was met with confusion. However, once they stepped onto the mat, the expressions on the students' faces began to change. Daria, for the first time, started to truly feel her opponent's breath. Keith realized that he needed to respond to his opponent's emotions, not just body movements. Even Roth, for the first time in years, began seeking balance, not the anger inside him, as he performed a move. But this peaceful atmosphere had caught the attention of the outside world. The academy had quickly become the subject of conversation within local fight circles, especially after the footage of Roth's defeat didn't make it to social media, but the story spreading by word of mouth had garnered even more interest. Newspapers, documentary filmmakers, and even Federation representatives began sending invitations to the gym. Elena wasn't disturbed by all this attention, but she remained cautious, because fame was the one thing her grandfather had stayed away from. If this change was to last, it had to proceed with sustainable ethics, not an attention-grabbing spectacle. At that moment, Nina came over to Elena with a folder. "You should see this," she said. Inside the folder was a petition signed by some of the old students. The letter stated that Roth was no longer a sufficiently competitively focused instructor, and that Elena's emotional and unconventional methods were damaging the reputation of the gym. There were 7 signatures at the bottom. Elena paused before closing the folder. Daria, who had silently approached from behind, asked, "These are the ones left over from the old system. The ones still here just to win belts. The ones afraid of change." Elena took the folder to Roth. Roth silently read it. He wasn't surprised, nor was he angry. He simply shook his head. "I've been the one to instill this mindset in them for years. Today, their opposition to me is just an echo of my past," he said. Elena replied quietly, "Echoes fade over time. But if we keep going without silencing them, we can speak to them, instead of punishing them." Roth slowly lifted his head. "Let's have an open meeting. Let them say what they want, and we'll explain why we're changing." When the meeting day arrived, the gym was full. Old students, new members, and observers. Everyone was wondering the same thing. Would this new system continue, or would Roth return to his old ways? Roth stood in the middle of the mat, with Elena slightly behind, observing. When Roth began speaking, his voice didn't tremble. "What made me strong were the tournaments I won. But what made me human was falling yesterday. What I learned from Elena is that even losing has an educational value. From now on, in this gym, it won't just be the winners who matter. It will be the ones who understand." There was a silence in the room. Then, a few of the old students left. They left without saying a word. But those who remained took a step closer. Daria stepped to the front, knelt down, and removed her belt, placing it on the floor. "I thought I earned this belt only for technique. But now I realize I've been working just for power. I want to earn it again. But this time, by filling it with meaning." Keith also knelt. "I do too." And so, a new ceremony began. No one was given a new belt, but a path was laid for everyone to earn back their old belts. Elena felt as if her grandfather's spirit was roaming the gym. His teachings were no longer just a memory in one person's mind. They were echoing in the lives of many. But there was still something missing. Elena still hadn't put on her belt. She was still teaching with her brown belt. Until Roth, at the end of the day, turned to her and said, "Now you're ready. It's time to wear that belt." Elena silently nodded, but she still didn't wear it, because there was one last day, one last lesson to do, before she would put it on in front of everyone. 3 weeks later, a new sign rose on the front of the academy. Bright, yet unpretentious. Modern, but respectful of its roots. It was written in simple letters on a white background, Wagner Dojo, beneath it in smaller letters. "It starts with respect, continues with balance." This wasn't just a name change. It was a declaration of a new stance. The academy was now a place where not only the body was shaped, but also the character. And the pioneer of this change, Elena, would wear her black belt for the first time today. She would put it on not from her grandfather's hands, but at the end of her own journey, in front of her students. The gym was packed. It wasn't a traditional class, it was a silent seminar. No talking, only movement. As Elena walked into the gym, everyone stood up. Roth stood aside, watching not the crowd, but Elena. Daria and Keith stood right behind her, ready and waiting. Elena's GI was still the same, simple, white, and free from show. But the wooden bracelet on her wrist now stood out more. That day, it was both her protector and her symbol. Elena walked to the center of the mat and knelt. She looked at the dozens of students silently waiting in front of her. She bowed without speaking. Then, she raised her head, her eyes scanning each one of them. And then, Nina slowly lowered the camera in the back of the room. Because this was no longer a scene that needed to be recorded, it was a moment that needed to be lived. Elena stood up. In her hands, she held a black belt. But it wasn't just any black belt. The edges were embroidered in gold with the words, Carl Wagner, Silent Strength. This special belt, made in honor of her grandfather, marked that Elena had completed her own journey, while also beginning to carry his legacy. She held the belt carefully with both hands, then gently untied her brown belt. She placed it on the mat, quietly. Her eyes were filled with emotion, but her smile remained calm. She carefully tied the new belt around her waist. There wasn't a sound in the room. And then, Roth stepped forward. He slowly walked to Elena's side. You've reminded me of so much. What I forgot, what I ran from, but most importantly, why I started. This time, his voice wasn't trembling. It was firm. You didn't build this gym, but it was reborn with you. And this name should carry not only Carl Wagner's legacy, but yours as well. Elena bowed her head slightly. I'm just carrying the flag. At that moment, the entrance door opened. A young girl walked in, no older than 14. She wore a new GI, her steps filled with excitement and hesitation. With a tightly held application form in her hand, she walked forward. Roth bent down to her side. What's your name? He asked. Maya, the girl whispered. Roth smiled and turned back. Professor Wagner, I've brought you a new student. Elena paused for a moment. Professor Wagner. This title had never been given to her. But in that moment, it resonated throughout the gym. Elena turned her head towards Maya, knelt down, and extended her hand. If you're ready, we'll start together. The rest of the day was spent training. But this training wasn't about repeating classic techniques. It was about the harmony of mind and body. One by one, students ventured into both their physical and mental limits under Elena's guidance. This dojo was no longer a place to produce champions. It had become a place to shape people. At the end of the day, Nina turned back to the camera and recorded one last sentence. A woman came. She was silent, humble, belittled, but not only in 14 seconds. She changed a world with the legacy she carried for 14 years. And now, with her, we begin again to touch other lives. As the screen faded, only the following words appeared. True strength is not about defeating someone. It's about lifting someone up.